Dit is Vrydag die 15de Maart. Ons gaan aan met The Long Lost Grave. It's time for the next satellite fix. See if you can get it, Will said curtly, his eyes on the monstrous sea. We need an accurate fix. I want to try for Mossel Bay. We cannot take much more of this. If we can make it, Tony mused as he clung to the chart table, watching the changing digitals on the Magnafox satellite navigation. Will it fix in this weather? He asked doubtfully. Of course. Will glanced at the copper frame, watch against the bulkhead. Any time now. And I want an update on our headway speed. He slurped the last of his coffee. At that moment, a warning buzzer went off, loud and shrill. Will swore viciously as his eyes flashed to the instruments. Cripes! Port engine is flooding. The pumps cannot keep up. Tony didn't answer. He was busy making calculations, running the parallel ruler across the chart to mark their new position. Rechecking with the newly fixed satnav, he grunted aloud. 8 miles from Mossel Bay, headway speed 6.5 knots. Bearing, Will snapped. 310 magnetic. Will spun the spiked wheel, forcing the wrecker on its new course. The sea was now on their starboard bow and bad. Almost immediately the cruiser began to shudder with each hitting wave, sending white spray up and over the boat as she reared askew over the gigantic waves, keeling dangerously over to starboard each time they plunged into the throb. The buzzer screamed agonizingly in his ears. He muttered in anguish. Another hour and a half. We are not going to make it. Not if that engine gives in. Without turning his head, he snapped. Where is Louis? He's asleep. What? That bastard will sleep through hell. Get him, Tony, and get the hand pumps going. And go around the hatches to see where we're taking water. And do something about the water in the portside engine bin. If that engine goes, we go too. And when Tony hesitated, get out and do it, or you'll never see the land again. It took all his skill and concentration to keep the boat under control and on course. There was only water as far as he could see. White foam speckled waves bore down relentlessly on them in a howling east wind. His back and shoulders throbbed painfully under the strain, and his arms were numb as he spun the wheel from port to starboard and back to counter the savage sea. His eyes burned with fatigue, his mind dully locked into the oncoming waves, judging, weighing, and contemplating. The buzzer had stopped mercifully, but the sound of the crashing waves and spray flung against the wheelhouse never ceased. Time had stopped for the crew. Down below, Tony Fisher and Louis Krause were doubled over the hand pumps, arms and backs dull with weariness. But they did not falter. It would be their end if they did. Up, down, in a never-ending rhythm of expellingly and steady stream of white water. In the wheelhouse, Will Stein stood with bloodshot eyes, staring over the sea, praying to a god he hardly knew. How long it had been, no one really knew, but eventually Will noticed that the waves were no longer flushing the deck and there were fewer specks on the water. Relieved, he realized that the worst was over. 10 minutes later, with only an occasional wave still coming over the bow, he noticed Mossel Bay a mile or so due west of them. They were safe. They had made it. He joyously swung the wrecker towards the harbour entrance. Half an hour later, the wrecker lay safely alongside a deserted jetty inside the harbour. The crew, jubilant with relief, yet utterly exhausted, could hardly wait for the bilgers to run dry before they hit the hay. They were glad to be safe and alive. In Plettenberg Bay, Ashley Gordon Forbes stared worriedly through the closed window to the stormy sea, wondering about the wrecker. Sighing uneasily, he returned to the bed where Selina lay curled up under the blanket. Damn this weather! The arrival of the wrecker was once more delayed, and just for how long he didn't know. Bailey's report was alarming. He could only hope that the gold was not discovered and taken out by the time the wrecker arrived. But that could hardly be possible. Still, doubt remained with him. What if he arrived too late? He shuddered. No, that was unthinkable. That gold was his. The wind blew with increasing ferocity all afternoon. Deviating between southeast and east, it chased up the sea, crowning the surface with white horses, while enormous waves came rolling in to the rocky coast, pounding on the rocks. Overhead, drifts of clouds began floating in from the sea, and a misty haze was slowly descending down the southern slopes of the Koga Mountains as the moist air condensed at higher and cooler altitude. The park was deserted on this gloomy Friday afternoon. The discouraging weather forecast had scared all but a few intentional visitors away. Those few who had decided to brave the wind and rain were either confined to their bungalows and tents or bravely following the trails, already disillusioned by their decisions. The weather prospects for the weekend were somber, or at least for those who had anticipated a sunny weekend out. But there were a few who hardly noticed the deteriorating weather. Kathy wiggled her hips from side to side as she slipped into her tight-fitting jeans. Closing the zipper and fastening the buckle of the thin white belt, she stood back to observe the result. Then, nodding approvingly, she donned a denim jacket over her blouse. Lifting both hands behind her neck, she scooped out the long dark brown hair from under the jacket and let it tumble over her shoulders. Next came the white woolen cap and a short scarf. From the small jewelry box, she took the St. Christopher and hung it around her neck. She gave it a shy press to the lips for good luck before slipping the pendant between her breasts. 2 small golden crosses decorated her ears and one of her grandma's old rings, her right hand. The left hand looked awfully bare. With very little makeup, her dressing was complete and she was ready for whatever the evening might provide. "Watch out, Rob Dubois," she giggled impishly, and with a last look in the mirror, she made for the door. She paused on the stoop. "Oh no," she thought as she watched the sky speculatively. Knowing the unpredictability of this weather, she trampled back to fetch her raincoat, and the phone started to ring. Kathy groaned, and for a moment she considered leaving without answering, but her conscience wouldn't allow her. It might be important, and with a sigh she grabbed the receiver, half expecting who it might be. She closed her eyes when she heard Klaus's voice. "Hello, Klaus," she spoke coolly, wishing she had not answered the phone. "What can I do for you?" "Well," Klaus said hesitantly, "it's Friday and I've hoped to come over." "Well, you have some nerve," she replied tersely. "Why don't you visit your dear friend Johnson?" "Oh, now, Kathy, look, I can explain." "Yeah, sure you can," she snapped. "All about how you wanted to swindle me out of the gold. All the lies about the book and honesty. Really, Klaus, you've burnt your bridges with me." After a moment of silence and a deep breath, "Yeah, well, I'm sorry about the lies, but there was a good reason for that." A good reason? Kathy exploded sarcastically. I can believe that. A whole fortune of gold all to yourself. Have you ever considered that I might have told you where the wreck was if you had been honest with me? Did you? No, you didn't. Listen, Kathy, don't get all worked up. I'm sure we can work something out. I love you. Klaus stammered lamely. You cannot just let me go over a silly argument. Klaus, listen and listen carefully. You don't know what love is, because if you did, you would have helped me instead of taking their side. You have lied to me, deliberately deceived and insulted me, and now you have the nerve, the damn insolence to come back and talk about love. Kathy paused, anger stirring inside her. It's preposterous. You are too much of a pompous hoax. Kathy, I never want to see you again, you miserable clown, she snarled, and I don't love you. Damn it, Kathy, Klaus growled harshly. You have no right. I have every right, she seethed. Leave me alone, there's nothing left for us. Kathy, please. You should have thought about this when you came here with Dan Johnson. It's too late for you, Klaus. Goodbye. Kathy slammed the receiver down, her hands trembling, but relieved that this part was over. But whether the stubborn Klaus would accept it was another thing. He was used to get what he wanted and to have things his way with women. She let out a breath slowly, and no matter what, she wouldn't receive him again. His betrayal was too easy, too deliberate, and now he expected her to fly back in his arms. Of all the ridiculous notions. The telephone started to ring again, but this time she ignored it and walked briskly from the rondavel, shutting the door behind her with a firm finality. Let Klaus Weber wring his heart out. She couldn't and wouldn't care anymore. When she walked into the tent camp 5 minutes later, she was surprised to find Peter and Anne Crawford already there, both warmly dressed and with a drink in the hand. They smiled a wide welcome as she came up to the cheerful burning fire, and her foul mood dissolved with the shooting flames and wisps of smoke. Where's the camp commandant? She inquired cheerfully, glancing with delighted surprise around the camp. Its location was perfect. The dense cluster of trees and bush effectively screened off the stormy east wind so that it was quiet and protected, while the pounding sea roared in the background. Hey, this is great. Very nice, Anne agreed and nodded towards the tent. The boss is in there. Herbie is still in town. Hi, Kathy. I'm glad you are here, Rob called from the tent. What do you want to drink? Do you have whiskey? Rob chuckled. Hey, now what kind of a barman do you think I am? 1 whiskey and soda coming up. He grinned as he joined them at the fire. You look great. Kathy smiled warmly as she took a drink and acknowledged his compliment. Thanks, she murmured back. You two are on speaking terms, Anne wanted to know moments later when the two women were alone. Yeah, sort of, Kathy smiled mysteriously. We are diving together. So I've heard. Rob talked about little else. Kathy seemed pleased with this information and sipped on her drink. She mused, much to Anne's delight. When Warden Opperman and Auntie Hertie stopped their combi in the entrance, Rob hurried to meet them. Fully warned and prepared for Aunt Hertie's good-natured inquisitiveness, he greeted her with his most adorable smile and swept her off her feet with the sweetest compliment he could think of. And when he escorted them into the camp and politely helped her to the most comfortable chair, he made his biggest alley up to date. Herbie arrived with Gabby shortly after, but it was some time later that Herbie got Rob alone. Selina is in town, he informed Rob. Have you talked to her? No, she didn't see me. There were 2 men with her and one is Bailey. Bailey? Librarian's assistant, the one who handled my stuff and answered Kathy's letter? Rob grunted. The news wasn't totally unexpected. They had always assumed that the full force of the opposition would arrive sooner or later. And if they were in town, it meant that there might be developments. But what kind of developments? What were their plans once they knew where the wreck was? And the other guy? Rich, by the look of it, in his early 50s, I guess. Probably the Golden Forbes guy. But I don't like the smell of it. Here is going to be trouble. Herbie popped a beer open. What do you think they are going to do? I don't know, Rob replied honestly, noticing Kathy's questioning look. Hell, she's beautiful, he thought as the wind ruffled a few rebellious strands of hair. I guess we better increase the diving and get the gold out. I don't like trouble. But we aren't just going to give up yet, are we? Rob smiled thinly, his eyes cold. Of course not. He needed not to say more. Herbie understood perfectly. But the evening was full of surprises. Hunched over the barbecue, tending the sizzling mutton chops or lamb chops, Rob absently listened to the small talk when he heard Kathy say, I've broken up with Klaus, and the fork in his hand stopped midway. Oh, I'm sorry, Anne muttered her polite sympathy. Well, I'm not. That's the best news I've had lately. Aunt Hertie sniffed. When did this most fortunate incident occur? Well, just before I came here, Kathy answered. It's been coming on for a long time now. I'm glad it's over. Aunt Hertie watched her quizzically for a moment. Finally, and I am glad. She patted Kathy's arm. Now, steer clear of his type in the future. There are many more and better ones around. The last words were strangely stretched. That remark shook Rob out of his trance. With a furtive glance at the other men, he hastily continued turning the chops, a sudden relieved elation washing through him. He'd been wondering about that guy. Must be stupid, Rob thought, to bugger up his chances with a girl like that. All of those present, his startled reaction wasn't missed by Herbie, who had also heard Kathy's announcement, and little brother saw the joy in his eyes, the furtive grin of pleasure, and Herbie didn't laugh about Rob's blundered announcement on the day of their arrival anymore. After all, he had eyes, and unless mistaken, the senior conservationist was also wounded by Cupid's arrow. The weather held further until after dinner, when a fine drizzle started coming down. Not at all discouraged, they moved into the house tent, and there, with the veranda front closed down, they continued the pleasant conversation while heavy droplets rolled down from the leaves above the plopped dully on the canvas roof. At this stage, Herbie produced his old worn-out guitar and dished out a few faded and well-used sing-song books. Gabby surprised everyone with a harmonica appearing from his pocket. They sang along with Aunt Herbie's firm voice and the 2 musicians' inspired playing. Rob, who had skillfully wangled himself into a position next to Cathy, found it hard to concentrate on the singing. He was acutely aware of her presence so close to him. A few times during the course of the evening their eyes had met, and every time he was rewarded with a pleasant smile that softened her whole face. She sang with a clear, cheerful voice that made him forget where they were. As if realizing his distress, she laughed at him as they clapped to the rhythm of Herbie and Gabby's music. Rob was lost to the world as he watched her over the sing-song book, and his heart thumped in his throat when he realized that her eyes too kept flashing to him. He instinctively knew that the interest was mutual. Or, what do you think, Rob? The question sounded far off. Rob? Huh? Startled, he glanced around. The music had stopped. What's that? The weather, Peter replied, or repeated. The weather is not going to play along with your diving. Rob nodded. I was just thinking about it. Liar, Anne accused with a faint grin. Mind telling us what you've been thinking about, or who? She teased, much to the other's delight. No, honestly, this weather, he retorted, stopping and grinned. He shook his head sadly. One can never win, he groaned as the others laughed. Well, it's time for a warm whiskey. Any volunteers? I need a hand. After a moment's hesitation, Cathy volunteered her services, and together they made the coffee and prepared the whiskey. Rob carefully poured a dram of the brown liquor in the glasses before filling it with black filtered coffee, while she added the cream on top. Of course, the men's drams were considerably larger than those of the women. The Irish coffee was slowly savoured while outside, in the coldness of the night. There was no slack in the ferocity of the wind and rain. At least, we now have time to find a suitable fishing boat and pump, Rob pointed out later as he walked beside Cathy in the falling rain. And as the weather is holding back, the others can't do anything as well. But my week's leave, she exclaimed with a tinge of disappointment when they stepped on the stoep of her rondavel. I only have this week to dive with you. As soon as the weather breaks, he promised, we'll be back in the water. Maybe we can bribe the warden into a few more days. She smiled up at him. And use Aunt Hertie's support. You have made quite an impression on her tonight. She likes you. Her voice trailed off. In the darkness of the stoep, the rain clattering on the veranda, they stared at one another. Their faces moved closer, and, taking her face in both his hands, Rob softly kissed her on the mouth. Tomorrow is Saturday, he said huskily. I can pick you up early and you can show me around the town and so on. Yeah, I would like that. They kissed again, a warm, lingering kiss that drew them into each other's arms. They stood like that for some time, clinging together, no words spoken, but with peaceful happiness in their hearts. Then Rob reluctantly left her a short while later. He ran through the rainy night back to the camp with a song in his heart, the gold temporarily forgotten. He knew he had found something and someone immensely more precious than any amount of gold. He was in love with Cathy Moore. The next day was grey and cold, with continuous squalls of rain, which turned the forest glistening wet. It was one of those days when married men wished to stay home with their first choice, snuggled together under a warm blanket on the carpet of the lounge watching movies on the TV. But some were less fortunate. While Rob and Cathy braved the rainy streets and cozy bars of Plettenberg Bay with the careless delight Three very anxious and discouraged men were working laboriously in Mossel Bay harbour. With the large hatches wide open above the twin 400 HP Mercruisers, Will Stein stood beside the portside engine. Streaks of oil stained the sides of the engine bin, while spilled oil and fuel speckled the moving bilge water. The engine had blown a gasket in the fury of the storm and burst a fuel line. The engine had spurted the oil straight on the deck's belt, showering the bin and engine with sticky black oil. Fortunately, the fuel had leaked through straight into the bilges, otherwise there could have been a fire. But the crux of the matter was, they didn't have a new gasket on board, nor could they find any around here. The nearest was in Cape Town, 500 kilometers away. "We will fly one in immediately," the salesman had assured them as he consulted his watch. "It's Saturday, but we'll try our best to have it here by tonight." "And if not tonight?" Will inquired. "No later than 10 o'clock on Monday morning." The man lifted his hands in a helpless gesture. "That's the best we can do." Will knew that the gasket wouldn't arrive until the Monday, and he didn't expect the weather to break until the next afternoon, at the earliest. And if they could have the cruiser ship shape by Monday evening, they could be in position to start diving Tuesday morning. No diver could operate in this weather, let alone those three amateurs. With a little luck, they would never touch that wreck again before the wrecker arrived. When Gordon Forbes and his dishy young girl had paid them a visit late the previous night, he had learned about the foolhardiness of the two men and women. He grinned inwardly. Wreck diving from a small rubber dinghy? It will be child's play to scare them so far away from the spot that they would hesitate before taking a bath again. He finished his cigarette and tossed the butt high up and into the sea. "Hey, watch out!" a startled voice from above called out. A thin face peered over the open bin. "That was nearly in my face," Tony Fisher grumbled. "What's your plan for the rest of the day? I mean, it is Saturday and I've met these three girls who love guys on boats like this. What do you say?" And Will grinned. "Let's complete all the maintenance as far as we can, and then, why not? I know of a few very, very interesting places I can show one of them. Like the inside of your bunk." Tony gave a dirty laugh, and Will experienced a flare of irritation. He had never liked the man. Sometimes." "Okay, Tony," he growled. "Get Louis to check the fresh water supplies and have it refilled. I will close up here and have the boat refueled. Now, let's move it before the next squall comes. And Tony," he added as the latter moved away, "let me have a list of all those lost equipment. And don't forget Mrs. Selena's deck chair." A great deal of equipment had torn loose during the storm and was washed overboard. One was Selena Nodea's precious deck chair, on which she used to stretch out that luscious body of hers. And often the tiny bikini top was discarded too, leaving the rosy-tipped breasts pointing to the sun. Unable to help it, Will felt a growing sensation at the center of his being. One day, he promised himself, as he lit another cigarette, he would ask her if she would be interested in him, and then take her on a date. "We'll make our move on Tuesday. Will they stand for it?" Ashley blew out a thin stream of smoke, staring through it at Klaus Bieber. "They don't have much of a choice. We just run the wrecker in there, shift their dinghy, and that's it. Once we've dropped our anchors there, nothing will be able to move us. He spoke casually, almost nonchalantly, watching the small group of people. The wreckers' 45-foot will dominate that whole area, and they won't get near the wreck. The small social gathering took place in Gordon Forbes' suite on the 5th floor of the Beacon Island Hotel. A show of apprehension and friendship, Ashley had explained to Selena earlier, a reaffirmation of trust and mutual understanding. And now, with tables filled with snacks and delicacies, a wide selection of wines and spirits, they were exchanging plans and ideas. Or rather, Ashley was informing them in a very subtle manner. Will the park authorities stand for it? The speaker was sophisticatedly dressed, a man with authority in his voice. It's a slam bang in the park's responsibility area. We have as much right to dive there as those others have, and we will not be bothering them anymore. We will not be passing through their gates. We will disturb no nature or wildlife. Furthermore, we will not be doing anything illegal. So, the man smiled thinly. No, we are not, but I suggest you play it safe and approach the situation with caution. I wouldn't like a departmental inquiry into this. The less dust, the better for all of us and the greater the success will be. Ashley ruefully glanced at Klaus. It could have been different if he kept his head with this girl. Kathy will be okay, Klaus retorted, annoyed. It was just a little argument. She'll be with us in no time. The man smiled thinly. Sometimes little nuances turned into permanent differences. Kathy seems a very strong, headstrong woman, so I won't bank on that possibility, Klaus. I will talk to Opperman. Excellent, Ashley exclaimed. He seemed happy that the takeover idea was so readily accepted. It's all settled then. He stood up smiling, wringing his hands in satisfaction. Ladies and gentlemen, let us have some champagne to celebrate our friendship and vast fortunes for all. Jy moet 'n lekker naweek hê, dan lees ek maandag weer verder. Dankie vir jou ondersteuning en ja, nogmaals, geniet jou naweek.